تلفزيون سلطنة عمان قناة عمان مباشر. نرحب بكم في المؤتمر الصحفي الخاص باجتماع الدورة 27 للمجلس الوزاري المشترك بين مجلس التعاون والاتحاد الأوروبي. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the press conference of the 27th GCC EU Joint Council and Ministerial Meeting. Now it's our pleasure to invite His Excellency Sayyid Badr bin Hamad Al Busaidi, the Foreign Minister of the Sultanate of Oman, to deliver his closing remarks.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا على حضوركم. طبعا كما يعلم الجميع العقد اليوم اجتماع يعتبر اجتماع مهم للغاية بين الوزراء الخارجية لدول الاتحاد الأوروبي ونظرائهم في دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية. لقد سبق هذا الاجتماع طبعا تحضيرات كثيرة على مدى أشهر من الوقت، ولكن ينعقد هذا الاجتماع هذه المرة بين الجانبين في سياق الأزمة الخطيرة جدا التي تشهدها فلسطين وبين فلسطين وإسرائيل. نعتقد للأهمية يجب أن نقول أن الجميع يفهم ويتفهم أن السبيل الوحيد والأفضل لتحقيق السلام الدائم في الشرق الأوسط هو الحل الذي يقوم على مفهوم الدولتين، وهو ما تستند إليه كل قرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة والقانون الدولي الذي هو الأساس لهذا الحل المنشود. مجلس التعاون الخليجي والاتحاد الأوروبي اتفقوا على أهمية ضبط النفس إزاء الأحداث الجارية حاليا، وأهمية تقليل والتقليص التصعيد الحالي، وأيضا على أهمية الإفراج عن المحتجزين المدنيين من جميع الأطراف. أيضا اتفق الوزراء على ضرورة معالجة القضية الفلسطينية من خلال تحقيق السلام والأمن الدائمين والعادلين للفلسطينيين وللإسرائيليين. اتفق الوزراء أيضا على المواضيع الأخرى في جدول الأعمال أن يتواصلوا بتعزيز الحوار البناء بين مجلس التعاون الخليجي والاتحاد الأوروبي فيما يتعلق بالتجارة والاستثمار، وفيما يتعلق بتحفيز التعاون الاقتصادي والتجاري، ودعم كل السياسات الداعمة لهذا التوجه والقائمة على النمو والازدهار للجميع. نحن ندرك تماما أن التغير المناخي يمثل مشكلة عالمية حقيقية وتحتاج إلى حل، وفي الوقت نفسه ندرك أن هذه المشكلة قد توفر فرصة للتعاون البناء والعمل المشترك لتخطيط وتصميم وتمويل البنية الأساسية الجديدة في أوروبا وفي الشرق الأوسط لتصدير واستيراد الطاقة من المصادر المتجددة. سنواصل لا شك العمل والتعاون معا لمعالجة قضايا كثيرة غير بالإضافة إلى قضايا المناخ تتعلق بالسلم والأمن الدوليين في العالم ومكافحة الفقر ودعم برامج التنمية وتحقيق الاستقرار والأمن حيثما كان ذلك ممكنا. حاليا التركيز في هذه الفترة بالتحديد ينصب بالفعل على التطورات الجارية المرتبطة بالقضية الفلسطينية وإسرائيل، ونحن جميعا ملتزمون بدعم الجهود الجديدة بشكل عاجل لبدء حوار جديد وهادف بين جميع الأطراف من أجل السلام. شكرا على حسن استماعكم وعلى حضوركم، وأعطي الآن الكلمة لزميلي الدكتور بوريل للتفضل بإلقاء كلمته.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now we ask His Excellency Josep Borrell, the EU High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, to deliver his closing remarks.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you to Secretary General. And thank you to all of you for your attention. It was 8 years since the last meeting of the European Union and the Gulf Cooperation Council and its member states. 8 years is a lot of time. This meeting was long due. And it has taken place in the middle of a terrible crisis, which was not foreseen when we called for this meeting and we prepared and organized it. And thank you very much to you, Minister, and to Oman for the excellent organization of this meeting. For us, it has been a very important and fruitful meeting that enhanced our partnership and puts us in a positive trajectory, both on the regional and bilateral track. I see a very good attendance of my fellow ministers of the European Union member states and of the European Union Commissioner on Crisis Management, Janis Lenarčič, and also the European Union Special Representative for the Gulf, the former Italian Minister Luigi Di Maio. This strong presence sends a strong signal of the importance that the European Union attaches to its privileged partnership with the Gulf Cooperation Council and its members. From this point of view, I'm sure we agree the meeting has been a success. This year, Joint Council was a particular significance. Has produced good results from both sides. Last year, we adopted at the European Union our strategy for the Gulf. At a time where the evolving dynamics in the world geopolitics makes us to need both each other, a stronger partnership to address our common challenges. These challenges were there before last Saturday and will remain. But last Saturday marked a terrible crisis for the Middle East and for the Gulf. There has been tragic moments in the history of the Middle East. What has happened since Saturday morning is shocking for the suffering that this attack has launched by Hamas has caused and continue to cause to innocent civilians, and the negative impact that this will have on the possibility for the two people live side by side in peace and security. Since last Saturday, I spoke to the Palestinian Prime Minister to ask the Palestinian Authority to contribute to immediate cessation of hostilities and promote the interests of the Palestinian people and the aspiration of the whole region to security and stability. I also spoke to the Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen to express the solidarity of the European Union in front of these terrible terrorist attacks, our strong condemnation of violence and terror, and expressed the need to respect international humanitarian law and to prevent more civilians' lives being lost. I spoke to many others in the Gulf and other partners in the region. And today we agreed that the priority is to cease violence and to prevent further regional escalation. It is of utmost importance to ensure the release of hostages as well as the protection of civilians at all times and by all parties. And in order to be concrete, in order to be well understood, let me read, with your permission, point 21 of our common declaration, which summarizes what I am saying. The Joint Council expressed deep concern about the grave development in Israel and Gaza and condemned all attacks against civilians. It called for the protection of civilians, reminding the parties' obligation under the universal principle of international humanitarian law. It further called for restraint, the release of hostages, and allowing access to food, water, and medicines according with international humanitarian law, and stressed the urgent need for a political solution to the crisis to avoid repeating this vicious cycle of violence in the future as it has happened in the past. The European Union and the Gulf Cooperation Council ministers are resolved to deplore violence and urge restraint and calm on all sides and agreed to continue consultations and to remain engaged. The Council supports the initiative taken by Saudi Arabia, the European Union, the League of Arab States, together with Egypt and Jordan, to revive the Middle East peace process. We reiterated our commitment to a two-state solution because it's the only solution. We don't know any other else, based in 1977 lines in accordance with Arab Peace Initiative and relevant United Nations resolutions. They stress the importance of sustained financial support for UNRWA and to continue the humanitarian and development support for the Palestinians in the occupied territories. This is the result of a long and intense engagement and discussion and frank and open exchange among us. Then there are other issues to which we have been engaged in discussion. I want to stress the importance that we continue giving to the two-state solutions, but at the same time there are other crises in the world. We talk about, not less dangerous, we talk about the aggressions against Ukraine that has unleashed a spiral of violence and devastation. We talk about the situation in Yemen and Sudan that are destabilizing the region as a few examples of the challenges we are called to address together. The latest drone attack on a military camp at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Yemen border that has killed 3 Bahrain soldiers, for which I extend our condolences, and the continuous contentious decision taken by the Iraqi court vis-à-vis Kuwait indicate that continuous efforts are imperative for ensuring peace and stability in the region. We want the European Union, together with you, dear friends and colleagues from the Council Cooperation, to reaffirm our mutual strong interest in a strategic partnership in order to be able to develop maritime security, to face cyber threats, disaster preparedness, and counter-terrorism. And we welcome the today official launching of a security dialogue and high-level forum for regional security that will take place in Riyadh at the beginning of next year. We discuss about the humanitarian needs worldwide, how to increase and strengthen our cooperation to reinforce the quality, quantity, and effectiveness of our humanitarian assistance. Our trade relations remain a key shared interest. We need to increase them in order to stimulate business cooperation. We also discuss about the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, launched by the G20 that promises a tremendous opportunity for growth, job creation, and shared prosperity. How not? We discussed about climate change and green transition that will be addressed on the COP28, where we will be working in cooperation. And finally, we reiterated the importance of fostering people-to-people contacts as the only effective means to promote inclusive societies founded on mutual understanding and respect for diversity, fighting against any kind of hate, and founded in mutual respect for diversity from the point of view of religions, ethnicity, and whoever differences are among human beings, because at the end we remain, all of us, human beings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And now His Excellency Jassim Mohammed Al-Budawi, Secretary General of the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf, will deliver his closing remarks.
شكرا جزيلا. أود في البداية أن أتقدم بخالص الشكر إلى سلطنة عمان حكومة وسلطانا وحكومة وشعبا على حفاوة استقبال وترتيب هذا المؤتمر الهام. كان للحكمة والدبلوماسية العمانية اليوم أثر كبير في نجاح هذا المؤتمر وهذا الاجتماع 27 الهام. فنتقدم بخالص الشكر إلى معالي الأخ العزيز السيد بدر بوسعيدي على حسن الإدارة لهذا المؤتمر. أود أيضا أن نتقدم بخالص الشكر إلى صديق دول مجلس التعاون صديقنا جميعا السيد بوريل على المرونة وعلى التفهم وعلى حسن إدارة هذا الاجتماع. هذه شراكة هامة، شراكة تاريخية، شراكة يعتمد عليها ليس فقط شعوب دول مجلس التعاون ودول الاتحاد الأوروبي، وإنما يعتمد عليها العديد من شعوب دول العالم ينظرون إليها نظرة هامة جدا لما توفره هذه الشراكة من فرص عديدة ليس فقط لشعوبنا ولكن لدول وتجمعات أخرى. الحضور الرفيع المستوى من قبل الجانب الأوروبي في المؤتمر اليوم أو في الاجتماع 27 يوم يعكس المكانة الهامة التي وصلت إليها دول مجلس التعاون سواء إقليميا ودوليا، ويعكس الدور الكبير والهام التي تلعبه سلطنة عمان. قبل أن أستعرض أبرز نتائج هذا الاجتماع أود أن أشير إلى النقطة 21 من البيان المشترك الصادر والذي تطرق إليه السيد بوريل قبل قليل، وأؤكد بأن دول مجلس التعاون مجتمعة ترفض رفض تام تعرض أي أبرياء وأي مدنيين في أي مكان بالعالم بغض النظر عن جنسيتهم، دولتهم، دينهم، مكانهم، جنسهم، سنهم. مبدأ التعرض للمدنيين هو مبدأ مرفوض رفضا كبيرا من كافة دول مجلس التعاون، ونحن نأمل بأن يتم التوصل إلى حل سريع وحل شامل للقضية الفلسطينية حتى يتمكن الشعب الفلسطيني من العيش بأمن وسلام بموجب حل الدولتين وبموجب الاتفاقيات الدولية وبموجب قرارات مجلس الأمن. فيما يخص نتائج اجتماع اليوم، كانت فرصة مؤاتية لنا جميعا للتباحث حول المواضيع ذات الاهتمام المشترك، سواء المواضيع والملفات الإقليمية والدولية والأخرى المتعلقة بالتعاون الخليجي الأوروبي. أعتقد معالي السيد بدر والسيد بوريل تطرقوا للملفات الإقليمية والدولية. أود أن أركز بشكل كبير على المواضيع التي تم التطرق إليها والإشارة إليها فيما يخص التعاون المشترك الأوروبي الخليجي. تحدثنا عن تعزيز التعاون الاقتصادي ورفع مستويات التبادل التجاري والاستثماري. تحدثنا عن التعاون في مجال تنسيق المساعدات الإنسانية. تحدثنا عن مواضيع تتعلق في سبل التعاون في مجال مكافحة الإرهاب والأمن السيبراني، تحدثنا حول الطاقة وضمان وأمن الطاقة، التغير المناخي، التعاون في مجال الصحة، تحدثنا أيضا حول مواضيع تتعلق بالتعليم والبحث العلمي والابتكار، التحول الرقمي والحكومة الإلكترونية. تم أيضا الاتفاق بشكل مبدئي على عقد منتدى إقليمي حول الحوار الأمني والتعاون خلال المستقبل القريب. هذا يعني نحن نأمل أن يكون هذا المنتدى يعني أداة تستخدم لنتبادل فيها وجهات النظر حول ما يمكن أن نقدمه لضمان أمن والسلم الإقليمي والدولي بشكل عام. في الختام أود أن أكرر شكري وتقديري وتقدير الأمانة العامة لمجلس التعاون لحكومة سلطنة عمان، ونتمنى أن نلتقي إن شاء الله مع أصدقائنا الأوروبيين في المؤتمر 28 إن شاء الله في أوروبا. شكرا.
إن شاء الله. Thank you so much, Your Excellencies. And now we'll open the floor for our fellow journalists and reporters. If you have a question, I ask you to kindly raise your hands and please keep it brief and clear. Thank you. We'll start with Oman News Agency.
Is it okay? Ahmed Blushi from Oman News Agency. My question will be for His Excellency, Mr. Joseph. You spoke about the partnership between the GCC and the European Union, which means more cooperation in tourism and in the economic sector. And this will lead us to the topic of visa. Don't you think that the visa exemption is a necessity in this time for the GCC citizens? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, yes, I understand the issue of visa is a very sensitive issue to which I have been discussing. You know that the visa is a decision taken by the member states, but the European Union institution has certainly an influential role on that. And the European Union decided on visa adaptations to facilitate the issuance of multiple entry visas for Gulf countries' nationals traveling to Europe. This is, I think, an important improvement. It's not the final solution, but it's certainly an improvement because it allows such visa cascades that have received already granted to the 5 GCC partners, given that the Arab Emirates is already exempt from visa requirements, and this will allow the citizens of these countries to benefit from long-term visas easily, from 1 to 5 years. So not for each and one of the travels, but as a package for a period of time. It's not the definitive solution, but it's certainly a strong improvement on the current situation.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now we have from Al Jazeera.
سمير النمري من قناة الجزيرة. سؤال للسيد معالي السيد جاسم والسيد بدر: هل مواقف دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي تجاه ما يجري الآن في غزة وخاصة التصعيد الإسرائيلي الخطير تجاه المدنيين مواقف موحدة وثابتة ولديها التزام ثابت تجاه القضية الفلسطينية، لا سيما أن هناك بيانات صدرت بدعم الجانب الإسرائيلي في هذه الحالة؟ سؤال السيد بوريل أيضا: هل الاتحاد الأوروبي لديه خاصة لديه اجتماع اليوم سيكون لديه قرارات ميدانية فاعلة تجاه الضغط على إسرائيل لوقف قصفها على المدنيين وخاصة مع تصعيدها الكبير في القصف الجوي على المدنيين خلال الليلة الماضية؟ شكرا جزيلا.
اختصارا للوقت، يعني هناك ليس يوجد أدنى شك في مواقف مجلس التعاون الموحدة والقوية بدعم القضية الفلسطينية وحل الدولتين باختصار شديد. تفضل علي.
الحقيقة ليس لدي ما أزيد على بالرد، ولكن نحن ليس فقط متحدون ومتفقون حيال المواقف تجاه القضية الفلسطينية وحق الشعب الفلسطيني في تحقيق مصيره والعيش والتوصل لحل الدولتين. ولكن أنا أذهب إلى أبعد من ذلك وأقول لك بأن هنالك جهود تقوم بها بعض الدول الخليجية حاليا، وهي جهود مدعومة من كافة الدول الأخرى. هناك موقف خليجي موحد تجاه ما يحصل الآن في غزة، ونحن نأمل أن نصل إلى إنهاء لهذا التصعيد في أقرب وقت ممكن. شكرا.
إن شاء الله. I will take one final question. Sorry.
Yes, certainly. You want to respond? Well, first, this is going to be an informative council, not a formal council. It's been taking place out of the premises of the European Union, and it's informal. It means that the ministers will discuss politically about the situation. I thought it was a good idea, since many of the ministers are here in Oman, and others could join us by video conference, to analyze and to know better and share among us the situation after last Saturday. I'm sure the ministers will agree with the communiqué that we have agreed with you. And I think and this agreement is everything that could be said, because we condemn all attacks against civilians, and all means all. Call for the protection of civilians, and remind the obligation of fulfilling the universal principles of international humanitarian law. It means that when in the ground Israel has the right to defense, certainly it has, but it has to be implemented according with the principles of international humanitarian law. And we call for the release of hostages, and we call for the access of food, water, and medicines, which is also according with international humanitarian law. And we call for a neater political solution that could avoid, once and again, this cycle of violence. And certainly we reject the terrorism acts that has created so many pain, and certainly, from our understanding, has not support and help the Palestinian cause. I think that the discussion of the ministers will be following these lines, and the agreement that we have been able to reach with our colleagues and friends from the Gulf could be a good pattern for our discussion this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Your Excellencies. Final question. He already has the mic, sir.
سيد جاسم، سؤال لك معاليك. هل وجدتم أرضية مشتركة لمفاوضات تجارة حرة بين الخليجيين والأوروبيين، أم أن ما حدث في غزة ربما طغى كثيرا على أجندة هذا الاجتماع؟ Another question just for you, Mr. Borrell. We know Omani has played a good role in GCPOA. Did you discuss any solution it can be from Omani side to revival the GCPOA? Thank you so much.
موضوع اتفاقية التجارة الحرة مع الاتحاد الأوروبي هو موضوع معلق منذ فترة، ونحن نتحدث مع الجانب الأوروبي حول العديد من المواضيع بما فيها احتمالية إعادة المفاوضات. مضى على تعليق اتفاقية التجارة الحرة أكثر من عقد، ويعني علشان تستأنف ولكي تستأنف المفاوضات تحتاج إلى اتفاقية جديدة. هناك العديد من التغيرات الاقتصادية، السياسية، التحديات، المواضيع الجديدة، فإعادة بدء المفاوضات مع الجانب الأوروبي تحتاج إلى خطوات عديدة. ولكن نحن بكل فخر وقعنا منذ أسبوع بالأحرف الأولى اتفاقية خليجية هي الأولى من نوعها منذ فترة طويلة مع باكستان. نحن بصدد أن نتوصل إلى عدد من الاتفاقيات مع عدد من الدول خلال المستقبل القريب. نحن في المراحل الأخيرة منها. دول مجلس التعاون مثل ما ذكرت لك في بداية حديثي أمس لها ولله الحمد مكانة اقتصادية ودولية وسياسية إقليميا ودوليا نفتخر بها جميعا نحن كخليجيين، والمجتمع الدولي هو من يسعى للتوصل وتوثيق علاقاته مع دول مجلس التعاون. شكرا.
Have you discussed with the Omani part any solution?
Well, I've been talking with my Omani friend, the minister, about a lot of things, among them certainly of the good work that the Omani diplomacy is doing in many fields, on mediation and communication between the parties. I know that Oman has an important role, is playing an important role, for example, with respect to Yemen, but also having important contacts that could be useful for the development of the GCPOA, but this issue in particular has not been dealt in the meeting. What we have been talking in the meeting, and I want to stress that, is that to diffuse some false information about, for example, that Germany was going to cancel the support to the Palestinian Authority. The German minister has clearly stated that this was not the case at all, that Germany will continue providing the support, certainly looking at the further developments of the medium and long term, but not suspending. And one of the parts of our resolution was stressing the importance of continuing humanitarian and development needs in the occupied Palestinian territories. We, as you know, it has already been clarified that it will not be suspension of the due payments to funds to Palestine from the European Union Commission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was the final question. We wish we would have taken more, and we have come to the end of our press conference. Thank you.
Good.
Many, many thanks, dear Minister and Secretary General, Ministers, Excellencies. It's a great privilege to co-chair this 27th meeting of the Joint Council and discuss with you the significance of our partnership for the prosperity and the stability of our respective regions and the profound impact that it can have on the international stage at that moment, at that troubled moment. I am in particularly proud of the very good attendance of my fellow ministers from the European Union member states, which is a clear signal of the importance that the European Union attaches to its privileged partnership with you, with the Gulf Cooperation Council, and its member states. We meet in this format in the Gulf region after many years, maybe too many years. The last time the Joint Cooperation Council took place in the region was in Doha in 2015, 8 years ago. And I want to thank the Omani Presidency, dear Minister, also on behalf of my fellow ministers, for the warm and generous welcome in this fantastic location. Let me also thank the Gulf Cooperation Council Secretariat for the very good cooperation in organization of this meeting and on identifying concrete outcomes for the main points of our agenda. Though we have met many times already, now we are meeting in the middle of a terrible crisis, and we should face it, and you should try to understand what does it mean and what can we do in order to solve it. Those days have been tragic moments in the history of the Middle East. What has been unfolding since Saturday morning is shocking for the suffering that this attack caused and is causing to innocent civilians, and the tragic impact it will have on the possibility of the two people to live side by side in peace and security. I spoke to the Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen to express the solidarity of the European Union, our condemnation of violence and terror, and express the need on their answer to respect international humanitarian law and to prevent more civilian lives from being lost. I also spoke to the Palestinian Prime Minister, Stahayev, to ask the Palestinian Authority, that has not to be confused with Hamas and other terrorist organizations, to contribute to immediate cessation of hostilities and promote the interests of the Palestinian people and the aspiration of the whole region to security and stability. When we say that we have to prevent more civilian lives from being lost, this should not be a rhetoric statement that goes without continuation. It has to be a clear request to everybody. I also spoke to many in the Gulf countries and other partners in the region. And I think that the priority now is to stop the violence, to de-escalate, to protect civilians, and the release of all hostages. The balance of those days is awful, unbearable. Over 900 Israelis and, we don't know, maybe 700 Palestinians, but the number is growing by the hour, have been killed, in addition to thousands of injured on both sides. The scale of the aggression took everyone by surprise, even though we were always aware and vocal about the fact that moving forward without peace or any political horizon was not sustainable. that to make peace between Israel and Arab states was necessary and good, but it cannot substitute making peace with the Palestinians. This is precisely why, together with the League of Arab States, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Jordan, we started a joint initiative to help to revitalize the two-state solution on the 18th of September with the Peace Day effort. Yes, because we need to look for the solution to the Palestinian issue. We cannot believe that it could be encapsulated and frozen and forgotten. The problem is there, and it requires a solution. And if there is not a two-state solution, then which is the alternative solution, if any? And this tragic event may be a wake-up call for the international community to remember that this problem is still unsolved, and we have to engage in trying to solve it to avoid the repetition of what has happened in those days. But this small and humble effort that we undertaken, together with our Arab friends, cannot replace a real negotiation process between the parties. We need a real push for peace. We need to recalibrate what we said at the United Nations meeting. It's not at the height of the problem today. We need to do more and quicker. We all need to engage actively in a persistent and creative manner to move beyond the current deadlocks. The conflict will not go away. It will not disappear. And it will only get worse with time. Though the peace looks very remote today, much more remote than some days ago, and even the process for peace negotiations look dim at this point, it remains the only way to achieve a long-term solution that brings peace and security to both peoples. And at the European Union, we still believe that the way forward remains the two-state solution. Difficult it may be, because we could not imagine another one. And we are keen to work with our key partners to that end and build on what we started in New York last month. Maybe these tragic events and so many lives lost may be a wake-up call for the international community to face this problem and to engage really to look for a solution to it. Dear Ministers, dear Secretary General, with these thoughts on our mind, and I am sure this will take quite a long part of our discussion today, because our discussion today cannot be business as usual, as if nothing had happened. With these thoughts in mind, we must deal with the current crisis today and work more closely together. Seeing us divided is exactly what Hamas and terrorist organizations want. We must resist polarization. The support of our Arab friends in stopping violence is vital. And in this regard, for instance, by passing messages to Hamas, as well to Israel, in order to prevent the crisis from spiraling and going out of control and embracing the whole region. We must seize the opportunity that today's meeting presents. Today we have a date with the history, if I may say. This is not an ordinary meeting. Today we have a date with the history, and an opportunity to explore ways to do what we can to defuse the ongoing crisis and look beyond the current day and try to project our efforts in the future in order to look for a solution that could prevent this happens again. 1 year after the adoption of our strategy for the Gulf, the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, we Europeans, we are here today to take stock of the progress of our cooperation, but mostly to commit to work together more and in more strategic areas. And that is very much important. It's still more important today in these times marked by evolving geopolitical dynamics that challenges the rule-based order, on those times of fast-paced innovation that urge governments to anticipate and address legal, societal, and ethical issues arising by the application of new technologies. I can cite how things have changed a lot in the last 2 years. The war of aggression against Ukraine has unleashed a spiral of violence and devastation. Across the Sahel, a serious scope of destabilization in the region as terrorism is gaining ground. Sudan is descending into full-scale civil war and disappearing from the front pages of the newspapers and media. Afghanistan also has disappeared, but is still there. Meanwhile, the global humanitarian system is overstrained by the growing needs. But we have also witnessed promising development initiated in the Gulf region. We have welcomed the reconciliation efforts that led to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran agreement in March, and we are very pleased to see that greater regional ownership of its security. Nonetheless, the latest drone attack of a military camp at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia-Yemen border that has killed 3 or maybe more Bahraini soldiers, for which I extend our heartfelt condolences to the Kingdom of Bahrain, indicates that continued efforts are an imperative to ensuring peace and stability in the region. We are also following with the greatest attention the consequences of the ruling by the Iraqi Supreme Federal Court on the 2012 Maritime Border Agreement with Kuwait. I had the opportunity of discussing that with my Kuwait fellow minister. Both Iraq and Kuwait are privileged European Union partners, and we want to set the issue, solve, and we stand ready to help and to support the territorial integrity of Kuwait. We will have the chance to talk about this more in depth during our meeting, but now allow me to revert to another subject. We, the European Union, with the full backing of its member states, are ready to support these region-led efforts to address the security challenges in the Gulf. By finding common ground to address regional stability and combining efforts, we can yield meaningful results and contribute to a more secure and prosperous world. This is why the endorsement today by this Joint Council of the EU Gulf Cooperation Council Security Dialogue is paramount to extend our partnership into the realms of security and stability. We are ready to make such dialogue quickly operational and hold the first meeting in Riyadh in January 2024. We promote the escalation policy for the maritime security in the Gulf and especially in the Strait of Hormuz and the Arabian Sea. We want to make a stronger work deepening the synergies between our 2 maritime operations, Agenor and Atalanta. Yesterday I had the opportunity of visiting here one of the warships of this mission, and thank you very much to Oman for its support. Yes, we need to explore avenues for regional maritime security cooperation with the Gulf, and our bilateral maritime security cooperation has to increase. Ministers, we have a lot to discuss on our joint action program that we endorsed last year Council. We have to talk about our trade relations, which remain central in our partnership. We have to further stimulate and increase business cooperation. We are keen to play a pivotal role in the realization of our visionary initiative, and I believe it's the greatest scope for cooperation with the GCC as a natural bridge between the 3 continents. We can use our investment capabilities of the EU and GCC countries to effectively engage the private sector to unlock the capital needed in order to face the great challenges of climate change and development. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about our humanitarian support. I am very glad to count on the presence of the Commissioner for Crisis Management, General Lenarchik, who yesterday immediately said that our humanitarian support to the Palestinian people will not stop. And I thank you for saying that publicly. Finally, let me stress the importance of fostering people-to-people contacts. And for that, we need a mutual understanding and respect for diversity, to fight against Islamophobia, but also against Palestinophobia, to fight against any kind of phobia based on ethnical reasons. And I have to regret that some events in Europe have created some embarrassing situation. I present our excuses for that. And believe me, there is not Islamophobia in the European societies. And now I leave the floor to the Special Representative of the European Union for the Gulf, the former Italian Minister Luigi Di Maio. I will have to urge you to shorten your intervention to 2 minutes, dear Luigi. We have appointed him for the first time and European Union Special Representative for the Gulf. And as part of your mandate, dear Luigi, is to engage to support dialogue and long-term solutions to the stability of the region. Then the floor will be for the Spanish Secretary of State for Foreign and Global Affairs, Ms. Ángeles Moreno Bau, and we will continue our meeting. Good morning, and thank you very much. It's a great honor. It's a great honor for me, Rear Admiral, a lot of you, and I am very much grateful for this opportunity to address this prestigious institution during my first visit to Oman, and I personally thank His Excellency Minister Al-Busaidi for his very much kind invitation. I could not make it when you first invited me in February 2021, but I dare to say that today's planning could not be more appropriated. 2021, the world was still, well, we had the COVID, we had the pandemic, but we didn't have a war. Since 2022, we have a war at the European borders. And those days we are unhappily seeing the events in Israel and Palestine that could bring another war. So certainly I'm coming here in a very difficult moment for all of us, because the war in Ukraine is not just a war that the Ukrainians are fighting. It's a war that sends shock waves to the whole world. I was in Kiev some days ago, and I visited military hospitals full of wounded and mutilated soldiers. And I visited cities destroyed by the continuous bombing, and every night there is a air alert that makes people run to the shelters. And in these last days we have witnessed a new tragic explosion of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, a tragic explosion. This is affecting the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, and is posing again great risk to the stability of both our regions. Both our organizations are founded on dialogue and cooperation. I mean the Council of Cooperation of the Gulf and the European Union. And only through dialogue and cooperation we could look for a solution to these conflicts. So I am even more grateful to His Excellency Minister Al-Busaidi for having gathered all Gulf Cooperation Council partners and the 27 ministers of the European Union here in Muscat, and will be tonight and tomorrow to review our strategic partnership and to look jointly to our common priorities. And security will be high in the agenda. People look at me as a diplomat, and they say, "Oh, you are the Foreign Relations Minister." Yes, I am, but I am also for security and defense. And security and defense was a second-rank issue, and now it has become the first-rank issue. And I feel more and more a defense minister more than a foreign affairs minister for the European Union, because I spend much of my time talking about security and defense. And yes, security and defense will be very high in the agenda of our meeting, and we hope that we will be able to launch a structured security dialogue between the European Union and the Gulf Cooperation Council at tomorrow's ministerial meeting. A permanent and a structured dialogue on security between the Gulf and the European Union, because the Gulf and the neighbor Indo-Pacific area will be the place where the history will be written in this century. And among the Gulf states, we are all aware of Oman's strategic importance. We were looking the map, Rear Admiral, where you are, just in the corner, where thousands of ships go on and out in front of the Iranian coast and neighboring the Yemen at war. for your geography. You are at the gate of the Gulf, and for your long history that we know and appreciate, you play a crucial role in mitigating tensions in the region, in particular with the war in Yemen. But allow me, before going to the Gulf region and talking about our bilateral cooperation, allow me to broaden the focus and talk about the current geopolitical situation worldwide. From our perspective, certainly, everybody looks at the world from their own perspective, and we have a European perspective, not the only one, but it's our. Let's talk about the geopolitical situation in the world from a European perspective, and I will tell you a bit about our own experience in Europe. Until now, we have been living in a unipolar world dominated by the United States. It's a world that emerged 3 decades ago, 30 years ago, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, this world doesn't exist anymore. The world that emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union and made the United States only hegemon in the world, unipolar world, doesn't exist anymore. And this is linked in particular to the growing importance economically, politically, of what today is often called the Global South. This domination, this way of talking, this name didn't exist 1 year before. And suddenly everybody is talking about Global South. Some don't like this denomination because they believe that it's a too heterogeneous set of people. But more and more people say, I am belonging to the Global South. So let's talk about it. Because in absolute terms, in terms of GDP, in terms of human development, in terms of innovation, in terms of the relation with the old power centers of the North, this is going to drive the world politics. And the other issue that certainly has changed the world and made the old world no longer existing is China. Is the rise of China, a spectacular rise of China as a major global economic and political power. It is the most obvious example that leaps to mind. You know, when China opened to the world by the end of the 70s, last century, China represented only 1% of the US GDP, 1%. Today is 80% of the US GDP. To come from 1 to 80% in a short period of time is a spectacular achievement that certainly changed the world geopolitics. China has becoming a major global economic and political power, and India is catching up quickly, and also the regional blocs, ASEAN. 3 or 4 years ago, ASEAN was not in the map. Today, ASEAN is a strong regional power, and Indonesia doesn't want to be a member of the BRICS because he prefers to take the lead of the ASEAN. And certainly the Gulf Cooperation Council are also, the Gulf countries, playing an increasing role on the world stage. So we believe in a more multipolar world, not a single pole, multiple poles. The paradox of this world is the more poles they are, the less multilaterality we have. And that's paradoxical, because one could imagine that the more poles, the more multidimensionality, multilateral engagement, and more rules. Because the players of the game, the more they are, the more complex their relationship, the more entropic may be the system. So we need more multilateralism, more cooperation, and what we see is we have less and less cooperation. For us Europeans, multipolarity is something that we are used to. We have been a multipolar continent since the end of the Roman Empire. Well, it happened 1,500 years ago. And with short periods of unipolar domination by one or other countries, it always ended badly. And we have been fighting among us for centuries, and sometimes driving the whole world in our wars, the First and the Second World Wars, were at the beginning European wars, and they finally became world wars. And especially after the Second World War, that finished very, very badly for all European countries, we almost committed suicide. Europe was destroyed to the roots in 1945. We finally realized that multipolarity does not have to involve permanently fighting against each other. That multipolarity based on accepted rules can lead to peace and prosperity. We learn that diversity does not mean necessary division and confrontation, as far as we accept each other's differences. We learn to embrace diversity of languages and cultures and history, and we made this our slogan. And that's why the official motto of the European Union is united in diversity. We will not become a single state. The member states of the European Union has a long story behind them. But we want to be united because we know that in this world of giants, we need the strength of the unity in order to survive. United, yes, but keeping our diversity, respecting the way everyone has been forged by history. And for decades now, European countries have drawn a definitive line on their belligerent history, not in order to forget about it, but in order to learn about it. Not just in the way we deal with each other, but in the way we deal with others. We solve the intra-European problems, but we have to learn a lot and to work a lot on the way we deal with the rest of the world. There are no longer wars among Europeans, but which is the role of the European Union with respect to the world? And when we talk about our relationship with the others, we have to remember our colonial past. And this is part of the history. But mentality changes, and it takes time in any society. And this is a lesson that we must also remind ourselves when we deal with other regions. I will come back to this point later. But let me stress that today, more than half a century later, you would be hard-pressed to find Europeans who are nostalgic of the disgraceful part of our history or who still desire to dominate the world. this is certainly the past. Nobody is nostalgic of the time when the Royal Navy or when the time of the French armies or the Spanish armies were dominating the world. This is no longer our ambition. What do we want today is to be a force to push for a shared prosperity. But at the same time, we don't want to be dominated by others. And we want to be able to preserve our way of life. And I am sure you can understand this. We don't want to be too much dependent of the others. Let me put an example. When the war in Ukraine started, we were so much dependent of the Russian gas that maybe President Putin believed that we would not be able to face in front of him because we were depending, 40% of the gas consumed in Europe was coming from Russia. And we cut this dependency in a very short time. We cut this dependency because dependencies can become a weapon. You believe that creating dependencies, trade, is good for peace, but take care because they can also become dangerous if they are too big. And we have cut these dependencies, and we want to ensure that no one power can subjugate others, and for that we set up not only a rules-based community within Europeans, we also want to work to build a new international system to prevent the excesses of warfare, the excesses of occupation and colonization. And I say that because at the time when the United Nations were created, this was essentially a Western project. And 4 of the 5 veto powers being Europeans or Europeans' origin. And many of the countries that today are very much important, they didn't exist at that time. They even didn't exist because they were colonies, or they were irrelevant, as China, who represented, as I said, 1% of the US GNP, economically irrelevant and technologically completely dependent. The world has changed. The former colonies and the countries who were poor and technologically very much also underdeveloped, today they play an important role, geographically, politically, technologically. And we have to adapt our institutions to this new reality. But we cannot throw through the window the system that we have, because we don't have another one. We have to reform and to improve it and to benefit of a fair representation of the world the way it is today. We have to accept to share power at the international organizations in order to adapt them to the reality of the new world. As I said, this world is becoming more and more multipolar, and also is becoming more diverse, more colorful, less dominated, less male-dominated. And we embrace this change that should be reflected at the United Nations, like in other administrations worldwide. But I insist, in spite of their imperfections, the international order, the way we know it, provides at least some fundamental guarantees that we have been taking for granted for decades, in particular the respect for the sovereignty, independency and territorial integrity of each and all United Nations members, and the prohibition of the use of force as a means of settling disputes unless the use of force is being mandated by United Nations Security Council in case of self-defense, Yes, we have been living on the belief that the use of force was forbidden, and nobody was going to use it in order to solve conflicts, attempting against the sovereignty, the independence, or the territorial integrity of its neighbors. And with the war in Ukraine, this is over. And look what has happened, another example, in Nagorno-Karabakh. The use of force has created, in a couple of days, the massive movement of 150,000 people leaving their houses because they were pushed by force of doing that. And if this has happened in Nagorno-Karabakh, why not happen anywhere else in the world? What is concerning about this increasingly multipolar world of today is, as I said at the beginning, is becoming less and less multilateral. The international order is less and less based in rules. And without rules, any international order can face international disorder. And this is, I said, paradoxically, because more players in the game, more rules, and more reinforcement of the rules. Because you may have rules, but if the rules are not implemented and nobody is respecting these rules, the game will finish badly. What we see today is that the respect for common has been eroding over the past decade. And I have to recognize that the founders of this order are not entirely innocent on this erosion of this order, because some of the founders of this order also participated in the violation of this order, to the point that even the most fundamental rules and unequivocal commitments today are being seen as options. No, they are not options. You cannot do cherry picking. I obey for this rule because it matters for me. I don't obey for this rule because it's against my interest. The system has to be considered as a whole. You cannot say that you only obey by the rules that are of your benefit. And certainly we at the European Union, we have to send the message that only a peaceful international rules-based order can solve the world problems. And as I said, it is in our ADN, because we have been killing each other enthusiastically for centuries, and on the last years, 70 years, it is because we adopted rules among us that are fully respected that we could build peace among us. Peace, prosperity, and freedom for nearly 80 years now. Second, because we know that the alternatives are to go back to a world where might makes right. The powerful imposes its law, and this brings destruction and suffering. And I know that you too, on that region, you have experience of the terrible outcomes that comes with a world without rules, where conflicts are being settled by force. Let me talk about what is for us the greatest existential threat. The greatest existential threat for the Europeans today is the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. It was launched a year and a half ago. This war is unprovoked, and we see a nuclear power. We see a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council launching a war of aggression against its less power neighbor. It is a classical imperial war. A great power thinks that it has the right to invade and conquer its weaker neighbor. Why? Because this neighbor takes independent decisions. And we know this colonial thinking in terms of spheres of influence between great powers. We know it too well, and now we reject it. Anyone should be able to take their own decisions without risking being invaded by this neighbor, if this neighbor doesn't like these decisions. And this is certainly a major issue for us at the European Union, because Ukraine has borders with 7 of the 27 members of the European Union, and several of them are also being threatened by Russian imperialism. But this existential threat and the enormous amount of political, economic, and diplomatic efforts that we are allocating to it doesn't mean that we are not concerned for the rest of the world, including and in particular your region. Most of you will remember when some 33 years ago Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Because he decided that he could do it, he was stronger, and he decided that he could do it, and he did. And many of our member states came to the rescue and sent their soldiers in arms, providing not only military support, but also financial support to help to liberate Kuwait from a megalomaniac dictator. And we in the European Union certainly don't expect the Gulf states to send weapons or not even money to Ukraine. We can, by our own means, succeed in preventing Putin from winning this war. And I am very confident that we will, inshallah. Because if it doesn't happen, if the aggressor wins and puts a puppet government in Kiev, and the Russian troops are in the Polish border, the question in Europe will be, who is next? Who is the one who will also be invaded? If he did once, well, it will be the second time he does. Why not a third time? And we have pledged our support to Ukraine for as long as it takes, and to provide with the means that it needs to resist the Russian aggression. And Ukraine is getting military more able every day. The war is lasting for more than 1 year and a half. I'm sure that when Putin launched the war, he was expecting a 2-week war. He was expecting to be in Kiev in a couple of weeks. He could never have imagined that 1 year and a half later, after losing more than 2,000 tanks, counted one by one through satellite images, 2,000 tanks, which is more than all the tanks that all European armies have, and losing countless soldiers, he has been to retreat at being at the defensive. This war will be studied in the war academies all around the world. The military around the world will study how this happened, because it's a mix of the most modern war with drones and electronic warfare, and the old wars of trenches and soldiers and mining and body-to-body fight. Yes, it's a strange combination of the past and the future. The war of the Starlings and the war of the First World War or previous. But as all wars, it will finish. But how will finish? Many people told me the more you support Ukraine, the longer will be the war, which is quite tautologic, certainly, because if I stop supporting Ukraine, the war will finish. And if we support Ukraine, the war will continue until a just peace. I cannot tell you when and how this happened. But we as Europeans, we wish for the end of the conflict, but to end in a way that Russia and other countries will bury their updated imperialist fantasies for the generations to come. And this is where the countries of the Gulf and the world have an important role to play. This is not about proving who is the strongest, who has the stronger army. We have been there, and we don't want to go back there. It's about upholding right over might, which means defending international law. We don't ask for military support, but we ask our friends in the Gulf and elsewhere in the world to take a clear stand and express an unequivocal position about this violation of the United Nations Charter at the United Nations International Fora. We also expect our partners not to undermine the sanctions regime that we have put in place to deprive Putin regime of the means to wage this war, including those imposed on his supporters. I know people say sanctions don't work. Sanctions work slowly, but they work. And they work peacefully and will be effective over time. And circumventing these sanctions, this will prolong the war. And to prove that what happens in Ukraine does not stay within Europe, we are facing a growing threat to food security globally. I was in the Odessa port the other day. Through the Odessa port, 20 million of grain was exported to the rest of the world every year. 20 million tons of grain. Now this port is empty. There are no vessels. And the cranes are being destroyed by the bombs. And the silos full of grain has been burned. And these 20 million tons of grain are stuck in Ukraine. They cannot go out because the Russian Navy is blocking the port. And someone will not eat this grain. And this will suffer hunger. Yes, let's call the things the way they are. Here there are 20 million tons of grain. And here there are the people who would like to eat this grain. And in the middle there is a warship preventing the grain going from Ukraine to the people who need it. It is using hunger as a war arm. And that's why we regret so much that the deal that the United Nations... Okay, then I finish. Let's talk about the way to look that the Gulf countries can do an important role. And since we are running out of time, I think the best thing we can do is to stop my long speech and be at your disposal to questions and answers. Thank you.